Do not breathe. Do not look at the windows. Get to the cellar, now. Those weren't the words of a man playing a game. Those were the words of my husband, Silas, whispered through a burner phone at exactly 2:04 in the morning. Silas had been dead for 3 years, or so the world believed. I sat up in my bed, the silk sheets suddenly feeling like a shroud. My heart, a 72-year-old engine that usually hummed along just fine, began to kick against my ribs like a trapped bird. Silas! I breathed, my voice cracking. Ilara, listen to me, the voice rasped. It was him. The same low gravel, the same urgent authority. They are coming for the ledger. They think you have it. They think you're an easy target because of your age. Prove them wrong. Go to the basement. Lock the steel door. Do not come out until the clock strikes 6 tonight. No matter what you hear. No matter who calls your name. The line went dead. I didn't hesitate. You don't spend 40 years married to a man like Silas Reed without learning how to move when the air turns sour. I am a Lara Reed. I didn't build a real estate empire in the heart of Birmingham by being soft. I lived in a sprawling estate nestled in the quiet outskirts of Mountain Brook, Alabama. This house was my fortress, or so I thought. I swung my legs out of bed. The floor was cold, a sharp contrast to the humid Alabama night. I didn't turn on a single lamp. I knew this house by touch, by the scent of the expensive floor wax and the faint aroma of the magnolias outside. I grabbed my robe and the small, heavy safe key I kept under my pillow. As I reached the hallway, I heard it. The faint, rhythmic thump-thump of a car door closing far down the driveway. Then another. They were here. I moved toward the kitchen, my slippers silent on the Persian rugs. My mind was racing. Who were they? Silas had mentioned a ledger, a book of secrets he'd kept from our days building the city. I thought he'd destroyed it. I thought we were done with that life. I reached the basement door behind the pantry. My hand trembled as I gripped the handle. I looked back at the shadows of my beautiful home. I had worked my entire life to earn this peace. I had outlived the scandals, the rivals, and the critics who said a woman couldn't lead. And now, at 72, I was being hunted in my own kitchen. I stepped onto the wooden stairs and pulled the door shut. The click of the deadbolt felt like a final sentence. The basement was dark, smelling of old cedar and the faint, sweet scent of the blackberry preserves I'd put up last summer. I descended into the belly of the house, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. At the bottom, I stepped into the cold room, a reinforced storm cellar Silas had built during the height of the civil unrest years ago. It had a steel door and its own ventilation. I stepped inside, pulled the lever, and felt the heavy metal teeth of the lock bite into the frame. I was safe, but as I sat on a wooden crate in the pitch black, I realized the horror of my situation. I wasn't just hiding from strangers. Silas had said, and in his voice, there was a specific kind of grief. A grief that told me the people coming for my life weren't enemies I'd met in a boardroom. They were the ones I'd invited to my Thanksgiving table. If you've ever felt like the people closest to you were only waiting for you to fall, subscribe to Vintage Vengeance right now. Type "Stay Strong" in the comments if you want to see how I turned the tables on the people who thought I was too old to fight back. You won't believe what I heard through those basement vents. Silence in a basement isn't actually silent. It's a symphony of settling dust and the low hum of the furnace, punctuated by the terrifying symphony of footsteps above. As I sat in the dark, the concrete floor leaching the warmth from my bones, my mind didn't just dwell on the danger. It retreated to the history that had brought me to this cold corner of Birmingham. I am not just a widow. I am the woman who built the Reed legacy. While Silas was the face of our construction firm, I was the one who balanced the books, negotiated the steel contracts, and knew exactly where every body, literal and figurative, was buried in this city's history. We didn't come from money. We came from the red clay of Alabama, with nothing but grit and a refusal to be overlooked. We had seen the way the world tried to diminish people who looked like us, and we decided early on that we would be the ones holding the keys to the kingdom. But success has a way of attracting parasites, even the ones you share a bloodline with. My daughter, Nia, no, I shouldn't even use that name. Let's call her Kiana. My only child, Kiana, and her husband, Malik. They were the reason I was sitting in the dark at 3 a.m. Kiana was 45, but she carried the entitlement of a princess who had never seen a day of hard labor. Malik was even worse, a man with champagne tastes and a Kool-Aid income, always looking for the big score that didn't involve a 40-hour work week. For years, I had been their safety net. When Malik's consulting firm folded, I paid the mortgage. When Kiana needed a new SUV to keep up appearances in the Highlands, I signed the check. I did it out of a misplaced sense of duty, the kind of motherly guilt that tells you that your child's failures are somehow your own. But Silas saw through it. Before he passed, he sat me down in this very house. Ilara, he had said, his voice weak but his eyes like flint. They aren't waiting for us to thrive. They're waiting for us to expire. They don't want the legacy. They want the liquid assets. He was right. 3 weeks ago, I had caught Malik in my office. He didn't see me standing in the doorway. He was hovering over my desk, his fingers trembling as he tried to bypass the encryption on my laptop. When I cleared my throat, he didn't even look ashamed. He looked frustrated. Just checking on your estate planning. Ilara, he'd said with a greasy smile that didn't reach his eyes. We just want to make sure you're protected. Protecting me or protecting their inheritance? Now, sitting in the cellar, the gravity of Silas's midnight call hit me. He hadn't just been warning me about them. He was warning me that the wolves were already inside the gate. Upstairs, I heard a heavy thud. It sounded like my antique sideboard being overturned. The sound of splintering wood, the very wood Silas and I had polished together 40 years ago, sent a surge of cold, white-hot fury through my chest. They weren't just looking for a ledger. They were destroying my sanctuary. They thought because I was 72, I was a relic to be discarded. They thought my age made me slow, my mind dull, and my heart weak. They were about to learn that a woman who builds an empire doesn't just let it crumble. If they wanted a war in this house, I would give them one. But first, I had to survive the next 17 hours. The first hour in the basement felt like a century. I wasn't just sitting in the dark. I was vibrating with the kind of adrenaline that makes your vision swim. My back was pressed against the cold concrete wall of the cellar, the rough surface snagging on my robe. I had turned my phone to silent, the screen face down on my lap, but the ghost of Silas's voice still echoed in my ears. Do not come out until the clock strikes 6 tonight. Above me, the house was no longer my sanctuary. It had become a hollow shell filled with the sounds of violation. The footsteps weren't hesitant. They were heavy, entitled, and methodical. I heard the distinct shatter of porcelain, my grandmother's vase, the one that had survived the Great Depression, and 3 house moves. Then came the sound of drawers being pulled out and dumped, the contents raining onto the hardwood like hail on a tin roof. I closed my eyes and tried to control my breathing. In the dark, your other senses sharpen until they become a burden. I could smell the dampness of the Alabama earth behind the concrete. I could hear the faint, high-pitched whistle of the wind through the floorboards. But mostly, I heard the voices. It's not in the desk, a man hissed. The voice was muffled by the floorboards, but the irritation was clear. We've turned the whole office over. If the ledger is here, she's got it hidden behind a false wall or something. Keep looking, another voice answered. This one sent a bolt of ice through my heart. It was younger, sharper, and familiar in a way that made me want to scream. It was a voice I had heard at every Sunday dinner for the last 5 years. It belonged to Malik, my son-in-law, the man my daughter, Kiana, had sworn was her soulmate. She's 72. Malik snapped, his voice getting louder as he moved toward the kitchen, right above my head. How much of a fight could she have put up? Where did she go? The car is still in the garage. She didn't just vanish into thin air. Maybe she's at a neighbor's, the first man suggested. At 2 a.m, without her shoes. Her slippers are right by the bed. Malik said. I could hear the pacing now, back and forth, back and forth. She's in this house. She's hiding. And when I find her, she's going to tell me exactly where Silas kept the offshore access codes. I bit my lip so hard I tasted copper. They weren't just after a ledger. They were after the entire Reed empire. Silas and I had spent decades building a safety net for our family. And here was the man we had welcomed into our home, ready to tear it apart for a shortcut to wealth he hadn't earned. Then, the sound that made my heart stop. The pantry door upstairs creaked open. Check the basement, Malik said, his voice now directly behind the thin wooden door at the top of the stairs. The door is locked from the inside, the other man noted. Then kick it in, Malik growled. She's down there. I can smell her perfume. She's waiting for us. I shrank back into the furthest corner of the cold room, my hand finding the heavy iron bolt Silas had installed. I slid it home as quietly as a whisper. The steel door was thick, but the fear was thicker. I wasn't just a grandmother anymore. I was a target, but as the first heavy thud hit the basement door upstairs, a new feeling began to override the fear. It was a cold, calculating rage. Malik thought I was a helpless old woman. He thought 72 years had made me soft. He had no idea that I was the one who taught Silas how to play the game. The heavy steel door of the cold room wasn't just a barrier. It was a confessional. In the absolute darkness, with the sounds of Malik and his hired thugs tearing my kitchen apart above me, my hands found the loose floorboard in the corner of the cellar. This was why they were here. This was the ledger Silas had mentioned on that final, impossible phone call. I pulled the floorboard up. My fingers grazed cold leather. A thick, weathered book that felt heavier than it looked. This wasn't a book of business deals or real estate holdings. This was Silas Reed's insurance policy. Silas had been a man of many layers. To the world, he was a pillar of the Birmingham community. To the streets, he was the man who knew which councilmen were on the take, which developers were skimming off the top, and exactly which respected citizens were laundering money through shell companies in the Caymans. This ledger contained names, dates, and amounts. It contained the kind of truth that doesn't just ruin reputations. It ends lives. But the most controversial entry, the one that made my blood run cold, was on the very last page. I didn't need light to know what it said. I had read it 100 times since Silas passed. It was a list of names, people who had invested in a development project that never existed. And at the very top of that list, written in Silas's own neat handwriting, was Malik. My son-in-law hadn't just been struggling. He had been stealing. He had used his connection to the Reed name to orchestrate a Ponzi scheme that had wiped out the life savings of dozens of elderly residents in our old neighborhood. He hadn't just failed at business. He had preyed on the very people Silas and I had spent our lives trying to uplift. Malik didn't want the ledger to get rich. He wanted it because he knew I was preparing to hand it over to the authorities. He wanted to erase the evidence of his crimes. And if that meant erasing a 72-year-old woman who knew too much, he was clearly comfortable with that trade. Upstairs, the noise stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the destruction. It was the silence of a predator who has stopped running and started listening. Ilara! Malik's voice was no longer muffled. He was at the top of the basement stairs, and he sounded unhinged. I know you're down there. I can hear your heart beating through the floorboards. Just give me the book, and we can go back to being a family. Don't make me do something we both know I'll regret. A family? The word felt like a slap. He had spent years smiling at me across a dinner table while he was robbing my friends and planning my demise. I clutched the ledger to my chest. Silas had told me to hide for 18 hours. At first, I thought it was for my safety, but as the clock on my phone ticked toward 4 a.m., I realized it wasn't just about hiding. It was about timing. Silas knew how these men worked. He knew they were impatient. He knew that by hour 18, they would be desperate, sloppy, and vulnerable. They thought they were trapping me in a basement. They didn't realize that I was the one holding the door shut until the trap was set. The air in the cellar was growing thin, or perhaps it was just the weight of what I was hearing through the ventilation slats. The heavy thuds against the basement door upstairs had stopped, replaced by a chillingly calm conversation. Malik wasn't alone anymore. Another set of footsteps, lighter and more rhythmic, clicked across the kitchen tile. She's not coming out, Malik. You're wasting your breath. A woman's voice drifted down. My heart didn't just drop, it shattered. I knew those footsteps. I had bought those designer heels for her birthday last month. It was Alana, my own daughter, my flesh and blood, the girl I had carried, the woman I had mentored, and the person I had intended to leave every single brick of the Reed empire to. She has to be down there. Alana, Malik snapped, his voice tight with a panicked edge. The car is here. Her cell phone pings in the house. If we don't get that ledger before the sun comes up, we're both going to prison. Your father wasn't just a builder. He was a collector of secrets, and he put our names at the top of the list. I know what he did. Alana yelled back, her voice echoing with a bitterness I never knew she harbored. He kept us on a leash. Earn it, Alana. Work for it, Alana. While he sat on millions, he made me report to a manager like a common clerk. He treated me like a stranger in my own legacy. And my mother, she's worse. She's 72 years old and still clutching those account numbers like they're her holy beads. She doesn't need that money where she's going. I leaned my head against the cold steel of the cellar door, tears pricking my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. My own daughter. I had paid for her Ivy League education, her wedding, her failed boutique, and her 3-story home in the suburbs. I thought I was being a supportive mother. To her, I was just a barrier between her and a bank account. If she doesn't come out by dawn, we have to call the contact, Malik whispered. The name he mentioned next made the hair on my arms stand up. Julian Ward. My blood turned to ice. Julian Ward was a name I hadn't heard in years. A man Silas had once called the cleaner. He wasn't a businessman. He was a shadow. If they were calling Julian, it meant they weren't planning on taking me to a nursing home. They were planning on making me disappear. We can't wait that long, Alana said, her voice devoid of any emotion. The neighbors will see the lights. If she won't come out for you, she'll come out for me. She's a mother, Malik. She's weak for me. Just watch. Suddenly, the house went silent. Then a soft, rhythmic scratching started on the basement door. Mom. Alana's voice was suddenly different, sugary, trembling, filled with a fake terror that would have fooled me yesterday. Mom, please. There are men in the house. They're hurting Malik. I'm scared. Mom, please open the door. I gripped the ledger, so hard my knuckles turned white. My own child was using my love for her as a weapon to lure me to my death. She thought I was weak because I was a mother. She thought 72 years had robbed me of my discernment. I looked at the clock on my phone. 4:45 a.m. I had over 13 hours left. I'm not coming out, Alana, I whispered into the darkness of the cellar. And by the time I do, you're going to wish you had stayed a stranger. The sound of Alana's fake sobbing outside the cellar door was a jagged blade twisted in my gut. Every maternal instinct I possessed screamed at me to open that door, to pull her into my arms, and to believe the lie. But Silas's voice was louder. They are coming for the ledger. Prove them wrong. I turned my back on the steel door and the girl I no longer recognized. I had to stop being a mother and start being the architect of their downfall. I crawled across the damp floor toward the back of the cold room, where the old shelving units held years of blackberry preserves and pickled okra. To anyone else, it was just a larder. To me, it was an armory. I reached behind a dusty row of jars from the summer of 2018. My fingers brushed against a cold, smooth surface that wasn't glass. I pulled. A small portion of the shelving unit swung outward on a hidden hinge, revealing a cavity in the foundation. Inside was a heavy, olive-drab pelican case. My breath hitched. I hadn't opened this since the day Silas died. He had told me once, Ilara, if the day ever comes when the world forgets who you are, remind them. I popped the latches. The click echoed like a gunshot in the small room. Inside, bathed in the dim glow of my phone screen, lay the tools of a different life. There was a satellite phone, one that couldn't be tracked or jammed. There were several stacks of high-denomination currency. But most importantly, there was a small, sleek tablet and a series of high-resolution monitors connected to a closed-circuit system I had forgotten existed. I tapped the tablet screen. It flickered to life, showing me 16 different angles of my home. I watched in grim silence as Malik paced the kitchen, a glass of my expensive scotch in his hand. He looked frayed, his expensive suit jacket discarded on the floor. Then I saw Alana. She was no longer crying at the door. She was standing by the kitchen island, calmly scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the blue light. She looked bored. The terror she had been projecting seconds ago was gone, replaced by the cold indifference of a predator waiting for its prey to tire. She's not budging, Malik, Alana said, her voice coming through the tablet speakers. The old bird is tougher than you thought. She's 72. Alana, she's probably having a stroke down there. Malik snarled, slamming his glass onto the marble counter. If she dies before she gives us the codes, the accounts stay locked for years. We need her alive long enough to sign the transfer papers. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the basement air. They weren't just looking for a ledger. They were looking for a signature. They wanted to strip the Reed name of every cent before they discarded me. But as I scrolled through the camera feeds, I saw something they didn't know I could see. In the driveway, a dark SUV had pulled up behind their car. A man stepped out, dressed in a sharp, charcoal suit. He didn't look like a thief. He looked like an undertaker. Julian Ward. My heart hammered. Was he there to save me? Or was he the cleaner Malik had mentioned? Silas had trusted Julian. But in this house of mirrors, trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. I looked at the clock. 5:15 a.m. The sun would be up soon, but the real heat was just beginning. I reached into the Pelican case one last time and pulled out a small, silver thumb drive labeled Vengeance. It was time to see exactly what Silas had on Julian Ward. The monitors flickered, casting a ghostly blue light onto the rows of preserve jars. I watched as Julian Ward entered the kitchen. He didn't come in with a weapon drawn. He came in with the terrifying confidence of a man who owned the air he breathed. Malik straightened his tie, trying to mask his cowardice with a mask of bravado. Alana, my Alana, actually checked her reflection in the microwave door before turning to greet him. "Julian," Malik said, his voice cracking slightly. "You're late." The old woman is barricaded in the cellar. We need to get her out and get this over with. Julian didn't look at Malik. He looked around the kitchen, my kitchen, with a slow, disdainful gaze. He picked up the bottle of scotch Malik had been drinking from, swirled the amber liquid, and set it back down without taking a sip. "You've made a mess of this, Malik," Julian said. His voice was like silk over a razor blade. "Silas would be ashamed of what you've done to his home." "Silas is dead," Alana snapped, stepping forward. "And my mother is a relic. We called you because we were told you could handle complications. We need the ledger, and we need her to sign these documents before the bank opens." I leaned closer to the screen. Julian Ward had been Silas's protege, a man we had treated like a nephew. If he was working with them, then the betrayal was complete. I was truly alone. But then I saw it. A subtle movement. Julian tilted his head toward the pantry door, the one leading to the basement. And for a split second, he looked directly into the hidden camera lens. It was a look of recognition. He knew I was watching. He reached into his charcoal suit jacket and pulled out a sleek black device. "This is a signal jammer," he told them. "Once I activate this, no calls go in or out. No security alarms will trigger. This house will become a vacuum." Malik grinned, a predatory, ugly look. "Perfect. Now, let go down there and drag her out." "Wait," Julian said, holding up a hand. "There's a problem. I've been looking into your Ponzi accounts, Malik. You told me you only took from the wealthy investors. But you took from the neighborhood fund, didn't you? You took from the very people Silas Reed spent 40 years protecting." Malik's face went pale. "What difference does that make? We're going to be rich enough to pay them back. Eventually." "It makes a difference to me," Julian whispered. He turned to Alana. "And you're willing to sell your mother's soul for a penthouse in New York? You haven't even shed a real tear tonight." Alana rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, spare me the morality play. Julian, you're a cleaner. Just clean the situation up so we can get our money." I felt a surge of adrenaline. Julian wasn't there to help them. He was there to judge them. I grabbed the satellite phone from the Pelican case. If the jammer was on, this was my only line to the outside world. I typed a quick message to the one number programmed into the device, a number Silas told me to use only if the world was on fire. "The wolves are in the kitchen. The cleaner is the judge. Hour 5 is over. Start the clock." I watched the screen as Julian slowly turned toward the basement door. He didn't kick it. He didn't scream. He simply tapped on it, 3 short beats, then 2 long ones. A code. Our code. The message was clear. "The game has changed. Ilera. Are you ready to play?" The rhythmic tapping on the steel door stopped, but the vibration of it stayed in my fingertips. 3 short, 2 long. It was the read signal, a code Silas and I had taught Julian when he was just a hungry kid looking for a way out of the streets. It was meant for one thing only: execution of the final plan. I looked back at the monitor. The kitchen was a theater of the absurd. Malik was sweating now, his bravado leaking out of him like water from a cracked jar. He didn't like the way Julian was looking at the basement door. He didn't like the silence. He especially didn't like the fact that Julian hadn't once checked his weapon. "What are you waiting for?" Malik barked, his voice jumping an octave. "The jammer is on. The cameras are looped. At least, that's what you said. Break the door down, and let's get the signature. I have a buyer for the downtown lot waiting for a call at 9 a.m. Julian turned slowly, his eyes as cold as the Alabama River in January. "You're selling the downtown lot? The one Ilera turned into a community center for the kids. It's prime real estate. Julian, it's worth 8 figures. Alana cut in. her face twisted with a greed so ugly it made her look like a stranger. My mother is obsessed with legacy. We're obsessed with liquidity. Now, do your job. Julian let out a long, slow breath. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small remote. He didn't look at the couple. He looked at the ceiling. You know, Silas used to say that you can build a skyscraper on sand, but you shouldn't be surprised when it falls. He spent 20 years building a foundation for you, Alana, and you spent 20 minutes digging a grave for your mother. Enough of the philosophy. Malik stepped toward Julian, his hand reaching for the cleaner's lapel. In a movement so fast the camera barely caught it, Julian grabbed Malik's wrist and twisted. The sound of the bone snapping was a dull pop through the speakers. Malik let out a guttural scream, collapsing to his knees on the marble floor. "Malik!" Alana shrieked, backing away toward the pantry. "Stay where you are," Julian commanded. He didn't even raise his voice, but the authority in it pinned her to the spot. He looked down at Malik, who was clutching his mangled wrist and sobbing. "You thought you were the predator here? You're just a scavenger, Malik. You're the bird that picks at the scraps after the lions are done. And unfortunately for you, Elara Reed is the lioness of this house." I watched from the dark, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm. Part of me wanted to cheer. Part of me wanted to weep for the daughter who was watching her husband crawl on the floor and wasn't even trying to help him. She was just looking for an exit. Julian stepped over Malik and walked to the pantry door. He reached up and pulled a small, hidden lever near the top of the frame. Suddenly, the monitors in my cellar changed. They weren't just showing the kitchen anymore. They were showing the perimeter of the house. 6 black sedans had pulled into my driveway, silent as ghosts. Men in tactical gear, bearing the insignia of the state's most elite financial crimes unit, began to pour out. "The jammer didn't just block the phones, Malik," Julian said, looking down at the broken man. "It acted as a beacon for the authorities. Every word you've said for the last 5 hours has been recorded, time-stamped, and uploaded to a federal server. The ledger was never the evidence. You were the evidence." I felt a wave of relief, so strong I had to sit down on the crate. I looked at the clock. 7 a.m. I had been in the dark for 5 hours, but the light was finally coming. The next 11 hours were a test of the soul. Following Silas's instructions to the letter was the hardest thing I'd ever done. While the federal agents processed the scene above, while they zip-tied Malik and Alana and led them to the kitchen table for interrogation, I sat in the darkness of the cold room. I watched it all through the tablet until the battery finally flickered and died at hour 15. Then there was only the silence. I sat on my crate, the ledger in my lap, feeling the weight of every year I had lived. 72 years of building, protecting, and nurturing, all to end up hiding in a hole because I had raised a viper. But I wasn't just waiting for the clock. I was shedding my skin. The woman who went down those stairs was a mother blinded by hope. The woman waiting for the strike of 6 was the CEO of her own survival. As the second hand on my watch finally hit the 12 at exactly 6 p.m., I stood up. My knees popped and my back ached, but my hand was steady as I slid back the heavy iron bolt. I pushed the steel door open. The air in the basement felt different now, no longer stagnant with fear, but charged with the cold reality of the aftermath. I walked up the wooden stairs, my slippers clicking softly. When I pushed open the pantry door and stepped into the kitchen, the evening sun was streaming through the windows, casting long, golden shadows across the wreckage of my life. The kitchen was filled with people, but it was deathly quiet. Julian Ward was leaning against the counter, his charcoal suit still immaculate. 2 agents stood by the door. And there, sitting in the very chairs where we had shared Christmas dinner, were Malik and Alana. They were handcuffed. Malik's wrist was heavily bandaged, his face a ghostly shade of gray. But it was Alana I looked at. She looked up as I entered, and for a fleeting second, I saw a flash of the little girl I used to tuck in at night. Then it vanished, replaced by a sneer of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You think you won, Mom?" she spat. Her voice was raspy, stripped of its fake sweetness. "You're an old woman in a big, empty house. You've got your money, but you've got nobody. We're your only family, and you just threw us to the feds." I walked over to the table, moving slowly but with a grace that made the agent step back. I placed the ledger down, in front of her. "I didn't throw you anywhere, Alana," I said, my voice calm and low. "You walked into this cage yourself. You and Malik thought my age was a weakness. You thought 72 meant expired. But in this house, the foundation doesn't move just because the wind blows." I looked at Malik. He couldn't even meet my eyes. He was a broken man, realizing too late that he had tried to swindle the woman who had taught his mentor everything he knew. "Julian," I said, not taking my eyes off my daughter. "Did you get it all?" "Every word, Alara," Julian said, stepping forward. "The confession of the Ponzi scheme, the plan to forge your signature, and the solicitation of my services to clean the situation. They're looking at 20 years, minimum." Alana lunged forward, her handcuffs rattling against the wood. "I hate you. I wish you had stayed in that basement and died." I didn't flinch. I just looked at her with a pity that cut deeper than any insult. "The sad thing is, Alana, I would have given you everything if you had just asked. But you didn't want the legacy. You wanted the blood." The police cruiser's blue and red lights pulsed against the marble walls of my foyer, rhythmic like a dying heartbeat. As the officers led Malik and Alana toward the transport vans, the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was a vacuum. I stood on my porch, the 72-year-old relic they thought they could discard, watching the exhaust fumes of their ambition fade into the Alabama night. But my revenge wasn't finished. Arrests are just paperwork. True vengeance is a dismantling. I turned back into the house and looked at Julian. He was holding the silver thumb drive I'd retrieved from the cellar. "You're sure about this, Alara?" he asked, his voice low. "Once I hit send, there is no coming back for them. Even if they beat the criminal charges, they will be left with absolutely nothing. They didn't just want my money, Julian," I said, my voice as cold as the steel door I'd hidden behind. "They wanted my dignity. They wanted to bury me in the dark while I was still breathing." Hit the button. With a single keystroke, the vengeance protocol was activated. For years, I had funneled Malik's investments into a blind trust he couldn't touch. Every cent he thought he was stealing from the community had been redirected into a recovery fund I controlled. Within minutes, the luxury SUV in my driveway, the 3-story house they lived in, and the offshore accounts Malik bragged about were being seized by the bank. I didn't just take their freedom. I took the very air they breathed, the wealth that was their only god. I walked back to the kitchen table and sat down. My hands didn't shake. I felt a strange, terrifying clarity. People think that at 72, you're supposed to be soft, waiting for the end with a knitting needle in your hand. They forget that we are the ones who survived the fires they haven't even smelled yet. An hour later, my phone buzzed. It was a restricted number from the county jail. I answered it. "Mom? Mom, please." Alana's voice was hysterical, stripped of all its arrogance. "The bank just called. They're locking the house. Malik's lawyer won't take the case because our accounts are frozen. You have to help us. You can't let your only daughter rot in here." I listened to her breathe for a moment. I remembered the 18 hours I spent in that basement, wondering if my own child was going to be the one to end my life. You told Malik I was weak for you. Alana, I said, my voice steady. You said I was a mother, and that made me vulnerable. You were wrong. Being a mother made me a protector. And since you've decided to be a predator, I'm protecting the world from you. Mom, please. The 18 hours are over. Alana, I whispered. And now, your darkness begins. I hung up the phone and blocked the number. I walked to the basement door one last time. I didn't lock it. I didn't need to hide anymore. The house was mine. The legacy was safe. And the wolves were exactly where they belonged, behind bars, wondering how a helpless old woman had outplayed them at their own game. I poured myself a glass of water, sat by the window, and watched the sun finally rise over the Birmingham trees. I am Alara Reed. I am 72 years old, and I am the last person you should ever try to hide in the dark. They thought the basement was my prison, but it was actually my war room. If you learned one thing today, let it be this. Never mistake a woman's silence for her surrender. Alana and Malik are currently serving 15 to life, and the community center they tried to sell, it just opened its doors to 500 children today. This is the end of Alara's story, but the mission of Vintage Vengeance is just beginning. If you want more stories of legendary paybacks and the wisdom of the elders they underestimated, you need to subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. Don't let the algorithm hide the truth from you. Comment "Justice Served" below to let me know you stood with Alara until the very end. We'll see you in the next one, where we expose a doctor who thought his 80-year-old patient wouldn't notice he was stealing her inheritance. You won't want to miss that one.